This is probably just going to be very community-driven or group-driven. You guys tell me what you want me to talk about, and I'll gladly do it. I think a good place to start would probably be in this VoIP directory with the DAL plan and the GServer. So this is the main server, which is serving calls. It's a subclass of GServer, which is part of the Ruby standard library.
Sorry, Jake. Can you change the color scheme?
Oh yeah. Sorry.
So when you launch AHN, you're launching a subclass of GServer?
Yeah. There's a Ruby server class, which is a subclass of GServer, and it does start server basically. Server.start, which is start is a method which GServer exposes. So whenever you start a subclass of GServer, it starts listening on the designated port, and it has one method called serve, and serve takes an IO object. It's a really awesome way of doing servers in Ruby. You just create a class, subclass GServer, define serve, takes an IO object, connection comes in, server gets called with the IO object.
And that's that AGI address we're given asterisk, right? That's the port.
Yeah, exactly. That's where it goes. So this is kind of, well, I don't know how deep I should get into all the implementation details. This is kind of a funny trick. This is like maximum number of connections. It's like, why are they asking what the maximum number of connections? So I gave it infinity, which actually works. In Ruby, infinity is like, it's a numeric type, so you can do like numerical operators on it. Like, is 1 less than infinity? Yes. Is 10 greater than infinity? No. So so this is actually pretty common with GServer. There's a lot of people who recommend doing this to get around the maximum connections limit.
What's the default, out of curiosity? Like if you didn't pass an infinity?
Something weird. Gem which GServer. It's not a gem, but gem which will show you where these resolve to, where like something that's being required resolves to. Max connections 4.
4.
Kind of a problem.
That's
Okay.
all 6 to scale. You just need infinity.
Right.
Should've told me this year
1.0 divided by 0.0. And it also allows you to define a couple other methods, like disconnecting gets called whenever, obviously it's disconnecting. A couple others, don't remember what they are, kind of not that important. Whenever a call comes in though, as this IO, it goes straight to receive call from IO, and that is pretty much the setup. Whenever there's a problem, we will most likely get an EOF error. That is like if you netcat into it and then just do like Command D to close the netcat session, you'll get like this big stack trace, and instead of seeing that, it'll just exit gracefully. And here it's touching the Adhearsion event system. So if you guys haven't seen the event system, you can register callbacks on certain aspects of the system. It's up to those aspects of the system to expose whatever events they want, and Adhearsion tries to have framework level events that you can subscribe to. So this is an example of the before call hook getting triggered for asterisk calls. If we had free switch support, obviously it'd be free switch before call, and you could might be a good idea to have like a generic before call. Yeah, generic before call.
That's already in free switch branch.
Is it cool?
So this is AGI, right?
Yes.
So this is, asterisk is talking to this port through the AGI protocol.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And events is a class that you've loaded?
Events is Yes, it's been required by, I think it's adhearsion.rb. Yeah. So this is the main file. Whenever something does require adhearsion, it's actually requiring a bunch of these other things, and it gets events from somewhere in here. Event support. Yeah. So way down here, it gets to asterisk. No, it's actually somewhere around here. Asterisk is required, but yeah. Events has already been required, so it just resolves like a normal namespace would. Here's an example of logging in Adhearsion. I imagine some people probably don't see this a lot because they don't need to be doing a lot of logging other than puts, but the Adhearsion logging system exposes a pretty neat API. There's this log method available everywhere, and typically loggers allow you to log messages using different severities. So it goes from debug to info to warn to error to fatal. And you can do, just to like throw some code in here, you can do log.debug, or you can make up a namespace like David Bowie or whatever dot fatal. And I use that just to show that this can be completely arbitrary. And whenever the first time this is invoked, it goes to method missing, but it immediately defines a method called whatever you give it, and so it's not going through there. It actually resolves to a normal method, so it's not paying any penalty for performance. And the idea here is that a component can log its own component information without having to go through some configuration setups like step. So and notice how the severities can be added to the namespaces as well.
So my question is like, what is variables, and why did you do that?
Variables where?
It's throughout here. Call out variables.
He's talking about the AGI,
Yeah, still back in
the environment, basically.
So whenever a call comes in, it goes to I think it's actually in that receive call from. Let's see. I'm actually not sure where that's defined. It's probably maybe asterisk call receive call from, yeah. Call.receive from. I don't really need to show you the exact call, or the exact code, but yeah, so call comes in, with AGI there's AGI underscore some variable name. They get written out at the beginning of the session, and Adhearsion goes through all of those, strips off the AGI underscore part, and actually runs it through a bunch of coercers. I was trying to find that actually. There's some things which you want it to do before you have to interact with the data directly. You want it to kind of sanitize some things, like if the value of something is a number, it should be a numeric type. It shouldn't be a string. Or if something comes in as yes, it should be true instead of yes. So there's this filtering step where call comes in and it's just like, okay, let me make these variables pretty, and then it defines them all as what look like what look like local variables, but they're methods.
Right.
And that's probably one of the problems
That's
you
the biggest
faced.
one people have, right? They have the extension
Yeah.
.2s on a case.
There's definitely a good
statement.
argument for having those variables be instance variables, and the I guess the only downside to that is just that people who are new to Ruby will find that not completely strange, but like pretty strange, because normally characters before a variable, it's called a sigil. Normally sigils denote type, like in Perl they denote type,
Right.
or in PHP it's always $. But in Ruby they actually denote scope, which is kind of different. So when someone comes to Ruby, they might say, what is this @ sign? I don't understand the difference between @ and @, and they might just, or why is it that whenever I do
you
@foo,
could do an attribute reader, but it's more than that.
it's
right?
basically doing an attribute
But I
reader.
thought it's more than that because like the extensions guy, he's different. We have to sometimes put a 2s on it, like in the case statement.
Maybe because it's coming in as a symbol.
It's coming in as tech or as a number because he does
Oh, the
his
extension.
coercions on it.
Right, yeah, it could be the cursor.
So
yeah.
so if you have a case statement, you're trying to match a 4-digit extension on a PRI 0111. Well, there ain't no number ever going to come through as 0111.
Right.
So that's the problem with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wound up having to do a lot of extension reconstruction.
So you think
Yeah.
you may have a solid dial plan and you don't because
No, I just
that extension guy is probably the most problematic one. Anyway, I don't want to sidetrack. I'm just
That's a
trying to
good point. We
understand
should
it.
probably fix that. And
Yeah,
by the
there
way,
is this. It's actually a phone number object. And
Yeah,
phone number
it's
is a
more
type
yeah.
of numerical string.
Yeah, it's more than just a coerced value. It's an object, right?
Yeah, this was one of the earliest problems I had with adhesion, trying to come up with a way to represent these numbers in ways other than strings, because it does suck to like have all these things which are almost always numbers, because like you pretty much always have to deal with numbers on these things to be strings, and
Well, I don't, you know.
I mean
if
you would be
you're
doing
making
2i a lot.
command statement. I don't have a problem with them being strings all the time unless you ask otherwise, because it seems to be a lot more consistent and easy to think about. But
You'd be doing if string starts with 0, then don't call 2i or something. You know, you'd end up with logic around it too. So it's kind of tricky. And I'm definitely open to suggestions on how this can be improved.
all right, well that's I don't want to hog the time. But
Yeah.
I understand now that. So
So
we've launched the server, sitting there waiting for AGI calls. A call comes in, Asterisk talks to it through this AGI interface. And then let's talk, if you can, when, and I think we saw that in the code, was it dialplane.handle call, right?
Oh,
How, in other words, let's find out how it gets into the dial plan, and then maybe after we understand that, find out how events are done.
oh, good idea. So, okay, so yeah, there is a for a long time I was recommend, in fact I still pretty much do, I recommend matching all patterns and sending them to Adhearsion, and if you match all patterns, that is _ dot, that's like catch everything, send straight to Adhearsion. It will also catch extensions which are letters. Asterisk has a bunch of extensions which are letters, like H and
HSI.
yeah. So some of them aren't relevant for Adhearsion. It's been so long since I've had to deal with it. The main one I remember is just H, and I think there's also capital H too. And so I called those confirmation calls, and here it's just saying Dockland Confirmation Manager. Actually, I'm not sure what Confirmation Manager is.
Cool.
This is code I wrote like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. But you can kind of get an idea of what's going on there. The main
well,
thing
actually,
is
I think hang up should be mentioned specifically because it doesn't behave like every other call. It fires off an event,
Yeah.
as opposed to dial plan calls which drop into the dial plan.
you're talking about down here.
No. There's an actual hung up call event that gets triggered if you hit the H extension.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds familiar. I think that's call.rb. Is that right? Oh yeah, that's nice. Useless call exception.
Yeah. And meta call too.
Yeah.
Meta AGI.
Meta AGI call exception.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Failed extension. Call
That would be
exception.
I.
Hung up.
So I is going to be, I think, failed except, and H is definitely hung up.
Right.
I don't know if you-
invalid. specifically is the way it's used.
But I think it's how it's mapped into here. I haven't actually hit that recently.
Yeah.
The H I hit pretty frequently.
I'm just trying to fly through this and see if any of this. Oh, this is where the.
So it's gonna
Well, it's good because you don't want it to enter the dial plan as a hung up call because essentially you're going to
Right.
try to process your context on it.
Right. It'll execute.
channel.
It'll. If you are telling it to like play some sound files, it's gonna try to play sound files. It's gonna be like, hey, I'm a hung up call. You can't do this. So you definitely have to like intercept it.
So I think that's why it comes back as an event, as the hung up call event.
Right, and I think you can say in events.rb you can like register that. Like whenever you get that hung up call, it triggers something in events.rb.
Yep.
So when you call the dial plan, you're launching a thread, right? So each call to the
GServer
dial
does it.
plan is its own thread.
Yep, GServer does that automatically.
Which is where you get into the JRuby versus MRI stuff, right? Because you can, on a highly scaled system, you're going to have a lot of threads.
So when the call hangs up, it knows that thread and goes and kills it. Kills the thread?
When a call hangs up, it usually raises an exception.
Well, this is where it depends. Asterisk 1.4 and previous AGI, the socket closes when the call ends, unless you're using dead AGI.
Right.
So in your
Wait,
case,
and
the thread
most
will die.
most people aren't using dead AGI, right?
Right, but in 1.6 and later, everything is dead AGI. So you'll get the hang-up exception back. 1.4 you won't. Your thread will die.
So should we be using dead AGI then?
I would suggest it. It's because then you can handle what happens when the call hangs up.
So we
in line.
need to show an example instead of the standard AGI, the dead AGI example, right?
Well, and you actually mentioned this in one of the tickets. At one point, you had considered making the recommended way to do it was to use dead AGI because then your processing continues. But yeah,
Sounds like something I wrote years ago.
it's in Lighthouse.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
Here's that coercer, by the way.
it'll also make your transition to 1.6 easier because you'll have the same kind of
Yeah.
behavior.
Right.
So I could probably spend like a couple seconds just talking about the coercions. So there's this module variables coercions and then coercion order. These are strings which correlate to these method names, and they define the order that the coercion should be called in. And it's basically doing inject. If you're familiar with
Yes.
the Ruby enumerable inject method, the idea of inject is that instead of like defining some variable equals like empty array, traversing some other array, and then appending stuff into that temporary array, and then returning that temporary array, inject lets you basically do all that with one block, and it basically takes the return value of the first time you call a block and passes it to the next time it gets called. So you're kind of like passing this variable along, and then at the end it gets returned. So same thing happens with these coercions. It goes through each one of these methods. Each one takes exactly one argument, the variables, and it's expected to return the variables. And you can see these are actually using inject inside here. So coerce extension into phone number object. Variables extension equals new adhesion VoIP, or yeah, adhesion VoIP DSL phone number variables extension. Coerce numerical values to numerics. So lots of pretty useful stuff. Replace yes/no answers with booleans, stuff like that. I think it also adds some variables too. Yeah, like this type of calling number. I needed this for some project. We were doing inbound PRI calls, so we were getting this type of or calling TON, and I had to go look up the spec for this, the Q931 RFC, and then what happens is it basically assigns this variable to be a symbol, which is a much more sensible and useful thing to have. I can talk about how calls are handled, or I can talk about the DSL itself. It's probably more interesting to talk about the DSL itself, since the way a call is handled is basically just hands it off to that.
You might mention one of the things that I had to dig through was how methods that are scoped are attached to calls, like the modules that are populated at runtime with.
Yeah.
So you have like scopes for events, scopes for dial plan, scopes for global. Then you mix
Like
those.
methods for, you mean?
Yeah.
Methods for.
So-
dial plan.
Methods for which ends up in a module, which ends up in a.
Right.
So the AGI messages come in, and you're at this point, and you've read in all the variables. Now you're ready to instantiate something and call the dial plan, right?
Mhm.
Set the scoping.
There's like a dial plan handler. Yeah.
There are modules that are kept full of methods, like one for each scope, right? With global and events and dial plan, and then when the
When
calls
you say scope, what do you mean?
well, there's a
It's part of the
Adhearsion
component
scope.
system. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the call object gets mixed in with that, or I should say, the scope method or the scope module is mixed into the call object. So the call object has access to those methods.
To those globally defined.
Well, there's global, which is I think mixed into everything, and then there's so if you're a dial plan call, when the call comes in, you've got the call object. That call object has mixed into it global and dial plan. If you're an event, you get global and events.
Oh, okay, so a call object's created and we mix in.
Which is how you get the methods from components into these other things.
Okay. That's probably the part that is the tricky part.
Yeah. It's just like
non-intuitive.
It's just like defining a module. You say like module my dial plan methods, and then inside that module you can do def foo, def bar, and then whatever inside of them.
Right. So instead of the call object being included into the dial plan object, it's the reverse. The dial plan's including, as you said.
Well, the dial plan methods are included into the call.
Into the call object.
Right. So whenever you say methods for dial plan do, and then inside of that do block you say def my method.
Right.
That is actually going into a module. In Ruby, you can do module.new, pass that a block, and then inside there you can define methods just like you would
Right.
inside of like the module literal, like module foo.
Okay.
So that block is just getting passed straight to the module constructor, and then that module object gets included into your call. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Pretty good use of Ruby, I think. I mean, it's debatable whether like that's intuitive, but like Ruby's really modular. It's awesome to see method definitions inside of a block because it's pretty powerful. It's pretty powerful stuff.
Once I got it, that was pretty cool. It took me a while to get to where I got it, but
Well, it's not that hard to understand. I'll have to see if it's. I'll have to look into that a little bit more.
If
But
you look at some of the example components, I think they usually add methods to the dial plan.
yeah.
So you'll see it being used there. Methods for dial plan do, def, Simon game.
So, but there's only one dial plan. That's right.
Kind of, but
Because you have dialplan.rb, and that's. Is it loading up? Could it load 5
it
different dial
loads on it doesn't load if the file is not changed.
But could it load different dial plans? What you're saying? I
Not
mean, really, dial plan is just
It
a
loads from
block
one
inside
file.
of that file, right? So.
You can actually specify the dial plan in NRC.
So when we say dial plan, typically you've got dialplan.rb, right? But inside that file, there's really a bunch of blocks with scopes, with
Mm-hmm.
you know, a name, text with curly brace, close
Right,
curly
right.
brace, right? So those are arbitrary words,
Right.
actually, but those are tied back to what do you call it in asterisk?
Context, yeah.
Context in asterisk. So that's a trip up for some people, but
Yeah.
so
That's already nice to have configuration generators, right? Which
yeah.
Which
Well, the issue
completely
with that is,
remove
I guess, so you have to be careful what you name those things, right? You can't put a dash. You can put a
Yeah.
dash in a context and asterisk, but you can't just put a
Yeah.
dash
You-
in Ruby.
it's actually possible to do a dash.
well, you can, but it's not. You've got to work
It's
at
a
it.
huge hack.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically, if you get a method call there, and with no arguments, you could return a special object which implements the minus operator, and then you
Yeah,
then
so
you
we
receive
don't want to be
another
doing
object.
that kind of
Yeah,
stuff.
like whenever I was debating putting it in, but after talking to a couple people, it was like pretty obvious that no one would really like that.
Yeah.
So now, if you get a dash, it gets converted into an underscore. If you have an adhesion, if you have an asterisk context with the dash in it, it gets converted into an
And
underscore.
so people would need to know that's the equivalent
Right.
context.
Right.
well, and actually one of the things that's in 085 is that the AGI URI resource is preferred over the context. So when you make your call to AGI, you can specify where you want to drop in the dial plan. And the hope is that that'll make it more obvious, because a lot of times we get questions where people didn't match context between dial plan and extensions.
That already existed, actually.
It existed, but the preference was backwards,
What,
so
what
you never hit
happens
it.
if they have a context that's underscore and one with dash? So that's the problem I have with doing that kind of stuff.
Right. That's where
Because it's a non.
the principle of opinionated software
the
comes in.
mapping is broken.
If you're
Well,
doing that, then
But more than that, you can solve that problem very easily by having a single context in your dial plan, but the context variable is still going to have the correct spelling, right? With
That's a
whether
good
it was a
question.
dash or number
So
sign.
that's a good question.
Actually, I don't think it will, because
oh,
it
interesting.
gets coerced.
Does it?
Well, so if it wasn't there, you can call variables and get it from there, which is the uncoerced thing that came in.
Yeah, that's you could do that.
Yeah, interesting. I love hearing
Call
little tricks like that.
call. Eventually, you get to the.
I don't think it's. I've never seen call.call.
Well, it's,
Call
so
it variable.
We can get
well,
variables
no,
too.
so in the examples for components, you use the variable name that is getting passed in as call, and I don't know what else you would call that. But so self inside a dial plan.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw in like Simon or one of those, the example things was when the component was receiving it, the variable name for the argument you called call. I'm like, hey, that makes sense to me. Except that there's a member on that that's also called call. So
Probably.
I
Probably didn't notice that was going on.
I can't come up with any.
It may actually be here at a reader call. Call is a call.
Right, and then if you look in,
It may have a call.
If you look in Simon, you'll see that the variable that you pass in is called a.
It makes sense in both contexts, just not when used together. Right, because the inner call is the container for the IO object and everything else.
Right.
I mean, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So in the dial plan, let's say you have two contexts, A and B.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really just methods with blocks, right?
Yep.
Are you running that code? Is that what's happening? Are we evaling that?
Yep,
that
I can
code?
show that to you.
Yeah, let's see that.
That's kind of the fun part. There was like about a week or two when I was like just experimenting with like how I could make the syntax as like succinct as possible and also intuitive. I think I'm pretty happy with the existing dial plan syntax.
Also, something else that I would go for is if we had a special context name. I like the word default, but something that is a failsafe that if you can't look
Yeah.
up anything with that context, a kind of method missing sort of thing.
Yeah,
Because
interesting.
honestly, I'm doing all my logic somewhere else, so I just want to say this is my entry point for no matter what you have in the extension.
It does.
Well,
It does.
You can do that now with if you specify.
Right, if you
In
do
the-
that,
in the
but
example.
I mean, just that I ended up running into a problem that the thing that I had in my dial plan and the thing that I had in the URL, I thought that they were the same and they weren't. But
Oh.
if there was just some go-to term you could use in the dial plan, that just
Well, you would have
if
just some.
nothing else.
You would have some logging message in there, right? The default implementation that like, hey, you're probably not meant to be here.
Well,
But-
but what's funny and confusing about that is that it says you couldn't find context name whatever the context was.
Right.
But that wasn't the problem. It was that the network script or whatever was something else entirely, and so it couldn't find either of those. But it was the network script that was the one that should have been what was matching, and so there's just a lot of that stuff where
Interesting.
if you are wanting to use the dial plan to get the context to match up to do different logic, this makes sense. But it would sure be nice if there was a mechanism to just always make sure that this is my entry point, or at least have that be the failsafe thing.
I think I see it. It's on your run statement. Instance eval current context.
I don't know where you are.
And
I think this is the main place where.
dial plan.rb. Dial
yeah.
underscore plan.
What line?
50.
Oh. Run. So, current context. execution environment, right? Right. The entry point is the block. It's about current context. That is all of the dial plan methods. So play and all that is available on this execution environment object. That's what's happening here. Extend with VoIP commands, extend with call variables, extend with dial plan component methods. This is where the methods for dial plan get mixed in.
Okay.
The place where the contexts are defined is actually further down.
Load.
Context name collector. And this basically works by having just method missing on it. And whenever you invoke something like foobar, cas query, whatever, and Ruby can't find it, executes method missing, it gets a name and the block, and it says, oh, this is a context definition. I know its name, I know its implementation, I'm going to save that. After it's been instance valid into this context name collector, it then returns data structure, and then it finds the entry point, looks it up based on the context definitions, and then that's where it does the instance val entry point.
So the AGI is sending it the context, right? Because it's getting that from
Yep.
where
There's a
the
AGI
trunk
underscore
that's
context
originating
variable.
on.
Yep.
So you instance eval the dial plan code one time,
Yeah.
and then where do we call the actual context?
That's the instance val entry point, line 50 or whatever.
Oh, is that where that happens?
Mhm.
Ah. Okay.
That's where it's actually executing that block, actually executing the code.
So instance eval is at the class level, and class eval is at the instance level, right? So we're evaling this at the class level.
Now, instance val is actually, it's at the object level, it's at the instance level. It's
The root actually.
it basically takes a block and then changes self,
Yeah.
so that whenever it tries to resolve a method, it looks at the
Yeah. It's
object.
it's running it
or
on the
instance
object.
value.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
It's kind of like doing bind in JavaScript. So, does that answer your questions about how dial.rb works?
Well, but then when the call dies, that's when we started talking about. So the thread just automatically dies because
It doesn't automatically die.
the port. Well, if we're not running dead AGI, right? The port's closed, and GServer kills it. I think, right?
Well,
the port.
the
If-
thread just runs till there's nothing else to run, and then it. Yeah, I mean because.
If it was playing files, it would just play into nowhere. Is that-
No, it would raise
Asterisk
an
will
exception.
throw.
I thought it would. Yeah, it would
Okay,
kill
so
it, right?
asterisk 1.4, when the call hangs up, asterisk closes the socket. That's going to kill your thread, right?
Mhm.
Because GServer socket's
G-
gone.
That's what I thought. GServer's going to kill it.
Unless you're using dead AGI
Oh.
or asterisk 1.6 or later.
Sorry, GServer doesn't actually kill your thread.
Oh, it doesn't?
No, the IO object will be closed, and
So you'll hit the IO
there's
app.
like a hung up question mark method which checks to see whether the IO object is open. You can check that in your dial plan if you want, or I usually just like to let an exception be raised. If I'm doing a bunch of plays and inputs and all
Yeah,
that,
you won't.
and the call hangs up, well,
You're done.
if there's a problem in input, well, whatever, input is obviously going to fail. Let that exception bubble up, and it just will cleanly exit the thread. Exceptions are at the thread level.
Okay, so the advantage of dead AGI is
You can still keep doing things. Well, it tries to read from the channel because asterisk leaves the socket open for you to do stuff. But what you can do at that point is kind of limited. So, from the asterisk developer's point of view, a lot of people who had code executing on a socket, when the socket disappeared, they would lose their program, right? Because
right.
whatever was controlling it was dead. So from their perspective, they had no control when a call was hung up to do anything. Even cleaning up their own connections just died. You do have access to asterisk over the AGI socket, but you can't do things like get variable because there's no channel associated with it anymore.
But you can do get variable, I think.
No, it throws an error. It says
Even
500
get
hang up.
variable.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That's
So it
kinda
sounds
interesting. You
good
can't do
like a-
anything at all?
I'm trying to think of what you
No,
can
You
do.
can get variable with certain variables, but the variables that you can use are much more limited.
Okay.
Yeah, essentially any variable is dependent on the channel being up. By definition, the channel's down, so you don't get that information.
Can-
But you can do get variable on some things because I've got code that does that.
Like hang out
because
project.
Can you
That's
have
like the main
That's
argument
all-
for did
because
AGI.
that's
Can
how I
you
do
have
database
asterisk
cleanups
enter
at the end
something
of the call.
into
Yeah.
the call, the master.csv file? Can you have it log something?
Well, I mean, if CDR is loaded, sure. Are you saying you want to instruct asterisk?
Sure. Maybe you want to do something after that.
I don't know. I mean, if there's an application that would execute that didn't need a channel, maybe. I'm not sure what that would be, though. I'm not sure what.
Yeah.
Okay.
And let me say this: I don't know if you want to rely on the behavior because I guarantee it's changed
Yeah.
3 or 4 times in the last.
Well, the question I always get is they want a way to monitor how long a call's been on hold. And I don't know if events or what can handle
I think
that,
manager
so
events.
You could do that in pure Ruby.
I don't know how. It's not logged in asterisk at all.
How long a call has been on hold?
You'll get an event when the call goes into the queue.
If the phone's putting it on hold, if the phone's controlling it like those
Oh,
Just
phone
check
phones,
for your.
I don't think asterisk even has that knowledge.
Then you're stuck. If the
Yeah.
phone's managing the hold,
I
The
don't
way,
think it has that.
as long as you're playing music on hold, not at the phone level, like some phones will play it by itself, but if you're actually pulling it off, what I actually do is just trap for music on hold, start, stop events.
Well, that's what I was wanting to look at.
Right.
And does it track it to the call? If I could.
Yeah, because you get
So
the
I can
channel,
look
you
it up
get
and I
the
can
you get
tell
the
you what
channel
it is.
identifier for the call. So
There
I
you
just
go.
track the channel identifier, and music on hold, start, stops, and if the guy hangs up. The first thing it does is stops music on hold, then hangs up as far as asterisk is concerned, so you can still catch that event. You're still fine.
So that's a good segue. Now that we kind of understand this whole call dial plan thing, how did events mix in with this?
The system has a couple predefined events. They get triggered at the appropriate stage of the call setup or call teardown. Some things like the hang-up event.
And what is an event? Is it a new thread that gets called?
So there's a subsystem in Adhearsion called Theater. You may have heard that before.
Yeah, seen that.
It's basically manages a pool of actors. Actors are threads which have responsibilities. They receive messages, they do stuff, and they might send messages to other actors. So the idea is there are predefined event namespaces. You know, all events are kind of named, right? So and they're kind of like nested too. They look like URLs. It's like */ hangup or */ before call. Or like I think it's adhearsion / shutdown or something like that. They all kind of are obvious what they do.
And now with XMPP, we have lather events as well.
Right. That's a
Like
perfect example of extending the event system to support other new unthought of things. So whenever it's appropriate to trigger an event, Adhearsion will try to trigger it. There may not be anything caring about the event
So
at
when
that
you
time.
say trigger event, just talking Ruby, what's it doing? Is it loading a
It is
file and evaling it?
No, it is taking the name, finding the namespace, which is pretty obvious because it's how you trigger something, and then it goes to Theater and says, "Hey, trigger this namespace," and then Theater says, "Okay, do I have any handlers registered at that
Well,
namespace?"
so when it triggers it, is it sending all that call object
it
to it?
it
Well,
It's
it
a
depends
hash
on what
table
it-
full of array of blocks.
What's that?
It's a hash table full of an array of procs. And
Okay.
so it just spawns a thread for each proc that's going to be called.
The inf- the information
it
you have
actually
access to depends
distributes
on the
it
kind of event.
between like
So
four.
if it's a
threads or
manager
something.
event, you'll have
Yeah.
a manager interface event
It's a finite number of
object
threads.
that has headers and things associated with it. If it's an XMPP event, you'll have the information associated with that event. It's completely separate from any AGI, any existing call variables. You can, if you have an active call, you can look it up in Adhearsion's internal list of active calls. So if you need to get a call object and you know a call is up, you can do it that way. But the event itself won't carry any call information with it because it's completely separate from anything that's going on with an active call.
So like the music on hold, is that an event at asterisk, the adhesion?
So there are different types of events. There's adhesion events,
There's-
which are
yeah.
things that we've created within the system. And I'm actually, okay, so adhesion events are things like startup, shutdown, but they're also AMI events that have been proxied.
They're right here.
Okay, so these events come with adhesion by itself. The ones that say asterisk manager event, what happens is an AMI event, which is generated by asterisk and is something that happens on the manager interface socket, gets turned into an adhesion event, which is then used to trigger callbacks. Does that make sense?
Okay,
Because events really mean two different things. Asterisk events and adhesion events.
that's right.
Asterisk events get turned into adhesion events
Okay.
under the manager interface namespace.
Yeah.
So you register a handler for manager interface, and you look at the event names as they come in, and you decide to do something.
Okay, so manager interface is the general collector then for all the.
For AMI, for events generated by
For
asterisk
AMI.
sent down AMI.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. All right.
Right.
And
if you
you will have to look at the events that asterisk defines to figure out what to do with them, because they have their own information, and they change. Asterisk 1.6, a whole bunch more new events were defined.
So I did not realize that Adhearsion was keeping a track of all the calls.
AGI calls. It keeps track. There's a state.
AGI calls, right?
Yeah, all the
Anything
call
that comes into
objects.
the thread. Okay.
All the call objects are kept in adhesion.active calls, and you can query that to pull out call objects and do things with them.
Okay. Cool. So these are still threads, right? These are just blocks are getting called.
Well, so theater starts up, I think, 6 worker threads by default.
Right.
And-
That's what I was looking for. Yeah, it's actually
so-
the default constructor argument.
Those threads that are, so let's just take a simple
Yeah,
AMI
6.
events. AMI event comes in on the socket. Adhesion turns that into an adhesion event that is a manager interface event. And one of those worker threads executes it. So it's within that thread.
Okay.
And that's actually one thing we'd like to move to Event Machine now that
Mhm.
we can.
Mm-hmm.
Cool thing about
Although-
Adhearsion.
There's kind of a problem with that is that inside, if you execute that inside of Event Machine's event loop, you're going to block the whole event loop.
Right, we'll have to do something. We'll have to actually, I guess, start a thread. Yeah.
Right. You'll have to. In fact, I brought this up earlier. It's like, oh, we'd have to use theater for that.
So this is a cool thing about Adhearsion, but now that I know it's doing some stuff, it handles this quite well, and I'm wondering how. But let's say I've got 5 calls in, and they've already come in, and people are talking on the phone. I can kill Adhearsion and start it back up, and the calls aren't touched, right? Because
It
the
depends.
Asterisk is handling that.
So that's true, but you can't control those calls anymore.
That's my point.
Right.
So yeah, so I guess there's no. All that information's gone, right? That AGI list is
And the
dead.
reason for
empty.
that actually doesn't have much to do with adhesion. It has more to do with the way that Asterisk implements AGI.
Yeah.
Right. So Asterisk has control really of the call. Adhearsion's just traffic cop.
Isn't there some argument you can pass to AGI that says like end whenever like the call actually ends?
I know
Probably.
that you have a config variable that doesn't do anything.
Like, end
Oh,
start.
it doesn't do anything?
Yeah, there's two of them that like
Oh, yeah.
are referenced nowhere in the code.
Yeah, we gotta go. We need to go look at
Sounds
those.
like that got taken out.
Like the delimiter guy, where's he defined?
Why
No,
don't
no,
you-
the delimiter
That's-
is defined.
I know, but that code was so obfuscated. I had to hunt down 10 different
Yeah,
files.
that was one of the things that with
I
the
said,
meta
were they
programming.
just
I'm already
trying
getting
to
the
keep
fingers.
this
That
funny?
in your meta.
that I'm like, oh, it took me so long to figure out where.
And I
do
had a
actually
freaking
find
diff
it. Yeah.
too, and I couldn't find it. Man.
So in general with the AGI, what's funny is that if you actually just had asterisk loop calling AGIs multiple times, if you were keeping your call state externally, you could pick up where you left off when the thing ended. It would trigger adhesion again, but you would need kind of the whole small talk sort of.
Well, if we had it in
Yeah,
a
story
persistence
here.
data store, right? And then
But more than that, you would have to structure your code such that it was a state machine as opposed to having your code be sequential Ruby
Right.
to be able to pick up at the point where you left off.
You're assuming AMI though. With AGI, if you kill the process and the socket's gone, you're not going to get the socket back.
Right, but in your extension.conf, if you literally said, AGI
Oh, I
like
see.
8
Just
times,
loop it back.
then it would go and call you again after it said, "Shit, I don't know what to do next."
That's
Or just
true.
go
You could do
to,
that.
right?
Yeah, and so you could do some crazy stuff with that to have more fault-tolerant AGIs, but that would require
But then you need continuations.
right. You need continuations or some other mechanism that your code can say, "Hey, I've seen this unique call ID. I was right here in the call." So if you have a simple flow where it's not doing a lot, say trying to do something related to a conference call or something like that, then you probably could get away with it where you know the state is, I'm calling in, I'm in the conference, I'm not in the conference, then you might be able to sneak through there and do some cool stuff. But if you have...
Well, we could write all that stuff to persistence data store, and then when Adhearsion starts back up, it could try to go, let me see if there's anything in here, try to sync back up.
But trying to get your call stack to be reconfigured such that you're at the same place that you were is going to be very hard.
But the AMI should work whether it's been killed or not. It's the AGI, but we don't really care about the AGI.
Unless you've done something with AMI that just dependent on state. Like I have an application where I'm looking for 2 pound signs in a row. I mean, it's not great. It's a 3-second window, right? So it's not really a big deal. But that's one
But
example.
if you connected new to AMI, is it going to just keep streaming from where it left off? Or?
No, I mean, well,
you'll
the events
miss
are
the events between them.
right.
Well, that's fine. So there ought to be like a reset when you launch Adhearsion and say, oh, okay, what state am I coming into, right? Loads up the old call state, see if it needs to throw those
Right,
things
but
in.
loading the
It
call state...
may not be worth it, but it looks to me like it's something we could do.
Loading the call state means somehow getting the Ruby call stack back to the way that it was before. And that's magic that just isn't really doable. If you rewrote all of Adhearsion to be an evented mechanism where everything was callback based.
Right, so I'm talking
Then
just
you
limited
maybe
use.
could
I'm
pull
not
that out.
talking. I don't need to rebuild the Ruby call stack. I just want to make sure that, or those active calls that were in the list that I was tracking, at least let me know that where they're at.
Well,
Get that back.
Well,
Adhearsion already has
We
what
couldn't
you
do
need to
anything
be able to
after
do.
the fact, but hang up once those calls hang up. At least we could know they were there.
Adhearsion already has right now everything that you need to be able to, in your code, assuming that you were to store the unique call ID somewhere else.
Yes,
If you did
but it's
this-
not built in. That's what I'm
if
saying.
you-
That persistent store is not built in.
Yeah, and I think
It's implicit in GServer.
No. Those sorts of like keeping where you are persisting call state and things like that, I think is way out of the scope of anything that would make sense to stick in Adhearsion, just because it's going to be so specific to your architecture. But I do think it's cool that it's in the realm of something that you could pull off without having to make any changes
It'd
to.
be like one big fancy component.
Yeah, I mean, but you would really have to be building your component as a state machine where a call could be coming in at any point through that state.
It's
or
the
in
same.
any one
It's the same
hours.
problem of doing a unit test in the middle of a bunch of procedural code, right?
It
How
is
the
exactly
hell?
the same thing. It's
how
how
the
do
hell
I
do you
jump
get
in
there?
halfway through?
Yeah.
And if you solve those problems by turning your code into a huge bunch of states, then it makes it very easy that you could just say, cool, now I'm transitioning from this one to another. But it would make the code harder to follow otherwise.
Yeah. If someone really wants that, that might be an argument to like offer a different way of writing dial plans other than dial plan RB, like state plan RB or something.
Yeah, I mean, it would. That would be a hard one to wrap your mind around.
Yeah, you're not gonna want to show the newbies that.
So
Hey, we got this great state plan.rb file.
So you wrote
Come
all
on,
this
guys.
code. Do you have a bunch of tests that can test it with AGI and AMI?
Yeah.
In other words, are those mocked out?
Yeah, it mocks out a lot of the I/O stuff. Let's see, where is it?
And then I guess we have a different set of tests for 1.6, right?
Maybe.
Because they're
Not
quite,
really.
I haven't
they're
touched-
quite
No.
different
I haven't
by
touched any of
size.
the 1.6 code.
The difference is the delimiter. That one change will get you about 95% of the way there.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And then the other sorts of changes have to do with what apps take what and that sort of stuff, and what events are named differently, and those sorts of things are pretty much irrelevant to the level of the interface that Adhearsion gives you.
Well-
So one of the things going forward that to fully support free switch and those sorts of things that will have to happen is that there's going to need to be this higher level abstraction that Jay was talking about with the super manager sorts of things, where there will need to become a common vernacular to describe certain kinds of events and describe certain kinds of apps. And that would then do the things to merge the differences with 1.4, the AMI event is called, I don't remember, link up or something like that, versus 1.6, it's bridge, and some of those sorts of differences would be remedied in this higher level interface that you would get from something like the super manager thing.
I think we'd have to document also what things are safe to depend on and still be portable among engines.
Right.
Because you're always probably going to have the ability to do things like get variable on things that Asterisk creates, but your app suddenly isn't portable.
And
you need to know.
And honestly, I think that as you get further down the free switch thing and all that, that what may end up happening is that the current dial plan and the current call object are renamed to the asterisk dial plan and asterisk call object, and that there is a new file with a new set of classes that has a very restricted interface that is, here's the shared stuff, so that it's easier to box in that I know I'm safe if I'm using this interface.
Well, are we suggesting an MRM, a manager, relationship manager?
I don't think it's quite that bad, but
Well, it's like an ORM, right? So you plug in different backends, and we all have that common manager interface, the manager, the MRM,
Active model.
right?
It's not
Active
relational,
manager,
yeah.
whatever you want to call it.
yeah, I mean,
Uh,
to some extent, yeah. I mean, it's an abstraction.
but
one way or another,
MRM
whatever you
almost
call it.
seems like a component to me instead of a core part of Adhearsion.
If all of the different engines, telephony platforms are components, then yeah, it probably would be.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of problems with the component name because I feel like that some of the things that are being talked about as components are plugins to the core infrastructure. Some of the things that are talked about as components are dial plans like the voicemail stuff, and I think that those different things are very different in their uses. Now, they may still be able to use the same hook interface, which is just you have a file, a directory with a file in it with the right name, and we require it and do what you want. And so in that respect, that's cool, but I do think that it might make sense for us to start maybe coming up with different names for the voicemail component versus the,
Telephony
talking
engine.
to a new telephony engine.
Well,
I
if you-
agree, because AG and AMI aren't really components, in my view. There's some backend that we're talking to.
Right.
Yeah, maybe we ought to
Engines.
get rid of
Engines.
the current magic, the way it's structured, and do a more bundle/gem model. And we put those in there right now.
We
'cause
we
it
have
has
talked
to-
about moving AMI and AGI to separate gems.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
we're talking about.
well, the components, just kind of magically looks in there, right? We'll just put it in vendor or whatever. Bundle.
Yeah, the gem file could publish information about itself, so it could be part of the component system for gems to publish information.
I mean, part of that magic is now taboo with Rails 3, so it was okay with Rails 2.
But
But
I mean,
if and
the
when
plugin
we do
system.
want to have the gem component talk, I definitely have some strong opinions on the dev process that forces. I don't know if we want to start talking about that now or.
Well, I think we should finish on internals if they're.
Yeah. I would definitely like to have that talk. So, it's funny, there's some code in here about host definitions, and this is for the routing DSL too. Remember providers? I think that's this host. Anyway, by the way, while we're talking about tests, I think it would be good to migrate the test spec stuff to RSpec. Test spec didn't go anywhere. This actually used to be all RSpec, and then test spec was the new hot thing because it was this thin abstraction of test unit, and then it was used for a year, and then no one really. It never gained enough momentum. Adhearsion was kind of just trying to jump ahead.
I like
By-
test.
by
That's,
using
that's
test.
fine.
You like test spec?
Yeah.
I literally don't know of anyone using test spec or FlexMock anymore. That's what this uses.
If we could spend a few minutes on that, I haven't done a lot of test-driven development, and it would be
Okay.
helpful for me
Yes.
to see.
Yeah, I would recommend
That's good
RSpec
pairing.
with double
RSpec is not.
That's a good pairing session.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who don't like RSpec. So for various
I
reasons.
like it.
I like our spec.
I use shoulda these days.
I like
on-
shoulda.
Well, the project I'm
Should have
using.
moved to our spec.
RSpec fails.
I mean-
RSpec fails in that it doesn't.
Shoulda is now. They've said we're going to give up on test unit and we're
Really?
turning into a macro language on top of our spec.
Yeah.
So they're using matches
So
now
should've
for
done our spec.
everything, and there you go.
I like my
Yeah.
test to actually show how code works, and RSpec doesn't do that. And also, I can never remember, is it underscore space
Yeah, I don't like the pseudo
blah
English
blah
thing
blah. It's
personally,
like
but-
unless you have a test you're looking at, you never can remember how it's done. So
Oh,
usability is an issue, but
that's why having an IDE is
it's
helpful.
not transparent.
If you have an IDE, it'll just be like, hey, red squiggle underneath this text. Oh, you screwed up.
Exactly.
Reading autocomplete.
Yeah.
Which ID do you use?
RubyMine. All of Pivotal uses RubyMine. I think Josh Susser's like the only one who still uses TextRead.
Shell was right in the end.
Yeah, he was. Although I'm still pissed about what they did to me. I will not stand for it. So, guys, what else should I talk about?
I'm fairly happy so far.
Components, maybe?
Is there anything magic to it?
Components would be a good lead-in to as we start talking about how to create the AnHub stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And how, so walk through that a bit and then go into how the hooks might work to start doing that, and then that can be one of the breakouts.
And on that, I'm curious. You had on your roadmap make components into gems. I'm
You mean
curious.
Adhearsion.com/roadmap?
Yeah,
Or,
yeah, the old one.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you see is in the path to getting that done.
Hours of programming today.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, it looks pretty close to me. I mean, there's not a whole lot of.
Right. It's a good question. It's really just a matter of using the bundler APIs. Whenever you initialize Adhearsion, it's basically going through the components directory, finding Ruby files it should require, and then requiring them.
So we need to find another way to look those up.
Yeah, it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything else you'd really have to do.
And you think it's okay to break backward compatibility?
I don't think we would have to. Or we can leave the existing component loader. And
So
Interesting.
if they're there,
Add
pick
in.
them up, and if not, pick them
Yeah, I really don't want to break any compatibility unless.
up. Not like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll touch on this right quick. And maybe it's already been put to rest, but there was a while back people were wanting or thinking about forking Adhearsion.
Oh, I didn't hear about any of that.
So
Well, part of this is the effort to try and recombine the community and keep that.
I think that's
happening.
what solved it, right?
Yeah.
This is
we
on the
solved
mailing
that,
list.
right?
Part of this
I think
is
so.
to kind of make sure everyone's going down the same path, agree,
Yeah.
roadmaps, what we want to do, so that it stays as one. community
Right. So we're not
project rather than
okay. So
fragmented.
I just want to make sure I wasn't asleep at the wheel when those decisions were made. So
I don't know of anyone who would have talked about forking that isn't here or connected to IRC or something. I mean, everyone who's.
It's just because it kind of went to sleep for a while.
Mhm.
With Jay's transition to Pivotal Labs, Archer transition to Voxeo Labs, and now this is an effort to recombine everything. Ben came in, right, collected up a lot of the forks that had happened and contributions coming back and put them back into the main one now as well. So hopefully at this point that a fork isn't necessary in terms of a project fork.
Yeah, I think GitHub just about saved Adhearsion
Yeah.
with that.
GitHub's great.
Yeah.
I had one view and like all these patches I could consider. It was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Made it, I don't want to say trivial, but a lot easier
A lot easier.
than otherwise. So maybe, walk through the component stuff, and then that can lead into one of the breakouts.
Okay. It's been a while since I touched any of this code. Let's see. Okay, so components actually have like a rudimentary testing system kind of built in. You just do require adhesion / component manager / spec framework. It's a little bit. It's not. It needs some work, and I think it's actually based on RSpec. It is. Contrary to the rest of Adhearsion. I just did not want to go down the route of using test spec for something else when I could avoid it. Yep, mocked with double R. So it kind of suggests that you do RSpec with double R. Double R is a mocking system. But the main component stuff I think is here. So it's actually pretty simple. Let me scan it real quick.
Actually, I have a question.
Okay.
Because I haven't actually figured out the answer to this yet. Events.rb and all components. And as far as I can tell, all the configuration stuff is loaded at initialization and static.
Yeah, I think there's
The
an API
exception.
to like.
Well, I'm not saying. I mean, over the normal course of operation,
Yep,
nothing's.
yep.
It's all in memory and done in parse mode,
Right.
with the exception of dialplan.rb. So you can actually make a change to
Right.
running adhesion, and the next call that comes in, if you've got syntax error, it starts bouncing. I'm
Right.
curious why that gets reparsed, and could we not do that? Because I actually haven't looked to see where.
So you want
it
to
goes.
restart adhesion?
I want to make it so that adhesion ignores changes to dialplan.rb until either we tell it to reload it or.
Huh.
Or or it has a built-in -c or something to check it.
Yeah, right. Well, that actually is a separate thing I'd love to have is syntax check at startup.
Yeah,
But right now,
I looked
dialplan.rb
into
is
that.
parsed. It's read in with each new call.
yeah. It'd be nice if it
It's
would.
uncached.
It might be cached. I don't know.
No, I don't think
no,
it
it's not
is.
because
At least if
You
you,
can
just add
introduce
a
an error and then
-c
break
to
it.
it and don't do it, and
But it looks at file.m time though. Should reload context. Always.
so you're saying if the file's been updated, it reloads it.
all I
Yeah.
got to do is save that file, and it's.
I don't know what this to
immediate.
do is.
Yeah,
It's
which I don't
it's
really
very
want.
convenient, but it's sort of screw things up sometimes unless you've learned your lesson to do it.
I agree.
-c and
That's probably
check.
one of the most egregious bugs, and the I've looked into this like at least half a dozen times, trying to figure out why that happens,
What?
and why whenever you introduce a syntax error and call into adhesion.
Yeah, it gives you a non-meaningful error. Well,
it just like
I found it.
varies.
what was it?
Thread.abort on exception. The thread dies, but it does it silently. If you
Huh.
turn that on, you get to see the.
But I
And
was
it
trying to
doesn't give you
rescue
the error.
syntax errors.
No, yeah.
No, there's no syntax errors on sometimes.
If you turn on abort on exception, when the thread
Oh,
dies, it
that-
takes
that-
down the whole process and it shows you.
That may.
It does.
Dude, I was trying to like wrap that in like begin rescue.
So if you wrap it inside the thread, because if the exception gets to the thread, and the thread dies, you're toast. So you can't wrap the thread. You have to wrap it at the top. So like if you start the thread,
But the thread only dies because it bubbles up to the thread, the top level thread.
right, but you can't catch the exception outside the thread. It doesn't bubble up past the thread. So you have to be
I thought
inside the
I'm
thread.
pretty sure I was doing that inside of it, because whenever it loads, let's see, whenever it loads that, it's probably doing that in the scope of a call thread.
Yeah.
So it's in a thread already.
Right.
So whenever it's checking that.
So I found it by wrapping where you launch a thread
Uh-huh.
to start a call. I
Just
wrapped
do
it
one exception.
just inside that thread, and then I started seeing exceptions.
Kudos. I remember looking at that several times, and it was like,
Well, I'd pulled my hair out for a while with the same,
yeah.
because I was also chasing a bug in AMI with the same kind of problem.
Check this out. I ended up in this file by accident. OES server.rb. Free switch.
Should reload content.
Yeah, this had the should reload context.
Yeah, I missed them too. So
Yeah.
What's that?
What did I say?
Sound like you said should reload content.
No.
That's what I heard. That's what you heard.
Text.
That's a very strong command.
Are you saying in OES server it reloads the dial plan? I don't think that
back
code
when
is
it
used.
was a different dial plan. This code probably doesn't even work with Adhearsion. This is just code that's here because I didn't want to delete it because I realized we were going to implement free switch support at some point. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, this all worked at one point. Anyway, components. So, scope names. Right, so this handles the methods for method. It's what allows you to define those methods and, or lets you define those, yeah, that method lets you define those methods. And these are the different things you can pass into it. Methods for dial plan, methods for events, methods for generators, methods for RPC, methods for global. RPC was a system that I think RESTful RPC only cares about. There's a RESTful RPC component, and it's the only thing which actually uses this. So like whenever a RESTful RPC request comes in, it instantiates a new object and then mixes in these methods, and you can execute them over HTTP. I think it's pretty obvious how the methods for business works. Load components, it's going to the directory, getting all of the directories. Oh, right, yeah, all the directories. Yeah, this is the components. These are the folders inside the components directory. And then gets the name of that directory, and then tries to find the Ruby file with that component's name.
So does each component have its own directory?
Yep. Yeah, there's components / component directory name / component directory name .rb. So, you know, Adhearsion app / components / click to call .rb.
And also the YAML that
Yep.
Yep. Just trying to fly through this and see if there's anything I should talk about. If any of you guys have questions about something in particular, feel free to speak up.
So as it's loading, you have a directory. The directory's called components, and then there's just subdirectories, one for each component in there. It just walks through that directory on initialization, just loads them one by one. It's
Yes.
dynamic, right?
Can I
So there's
ask
nothing
you-
to configure.
And
Okay, right.
this is going to be a real strange question, no doubt. There's probably some brilliant reason for it, but why did you insist on the primary file names and YAML being the same name as the component as opposed to just globbing the directory and grabbing it and just grabbing it?
So that is the file name
Convention over configuration.
I think so.
It's kind of like a similar. It's kind of like a Rails philosophy. You know, you have a controller called users controller, and then in views you have users folder, and then inside there you have actions. Yeah.
I was just wondering, I had presumed it was something along those lines. It was just interesting from the horse's mouth as it worked. That was the reason.
Right. Yeah. Kind of Rails
So this
inspiration.
initialized component subsystem, what goes on those?
Exactly.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not getting any power. Or
Yeah.
Oh,
Initializer
okay.
contains initializers for lots of stuff.
Are you plugged in?
it says it's charging, although the light's not lighting up. I think it's because this is for a different MacBook.
Oh,
Like
You
the
can- yeah, you
voltage
can
is
ignore the
slightly
light.
different,
Don't
and the
worry
light
about the
doesn't
light.
show up.
Yeah.
the light
I don't know.
doesn't know.
Okay. Sure. Right.
Hey Jay, what were you saying about the components with AnHub and bringing them down to Gem?
Right.
Are you thinking that
That's the one thing I don't know if Heroku can do.
yeah?
I think the minimum viable product is to show links to GitHub repos,
Yep.
and the next step would be to find a host for it,
Yeah.
and just throw Passenger there, and then use Capistrano to deploy to it.
And then so every person that develops a component would need to add the post back or the post commit hook.
Yep. Just that
URL
one
to
step.
theirs. And then every time they post, it just
Yep.
pushes.
That's all they have to do. Yep.
And what are you thinking? Like GitHub would just basically have the most current updates, who it is, a link to the Git repo. That's pretty.
If it's serving gem files, it could also count downloads and maybe show the most popular ones.
That's an issue.
Mm-hmm. It could also allow people to tag things, tag it with asterisk, tag it with game, tag it with like no SQL or something. You know.
It probably wouldn't even need a login or anything, right? Because it's getting all its data from GitHub. I mean, I don't know what you would want to log in to GitHub to do. I mean, it's kind of like read-only directory.
Does GitHub have a OAuth system? It does. Wow, so you can log in with your GitHub account.
Okay.
That's crazy.
I think it's fun. I know the calendar about nothing. That Rick
We have that. Yeah.
And if you're looking at me like you haven't seen the calendar about nothing.
The what? The calendar?
Calendaraboutnothing.com.
Calendar.
You missed it.
I don't know.
It is the greatest website ever. So it goes through and will give you a little Xbox on the calendar for every day that you've committed to an open source project.
Yeah. I did hear about this. A long
And
time
so
ago.
if you click on like some crazy asses that apparently committed 125 days in a row, they committed something to an open source project.
Matt Knox. Matt Knox works at Twitter. I know him.
Foursquare for it.
Dan Cubb worked on Adhearsion. Literally.
So if you click on
Back
that,
in
Looks like he's
back,
worked on a lot.
yeah, back when I lived in a basement in Vancouver, he was working with me on a project. It was actually Eric Lagerway was the client.
From,
Yeah.
awesome.
From Counterpath. Yeah, exactly. This was just after he left Counterpath. Though. He was one of the founders of Counterpath.
What a smart dude. Or at least seems to be from the outside.
Yeah, he was. That was a free switch project.
Oh,
That-
really?
Yeah, he was paying for the free switch bindings.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That's when those got written.
Is that why that withered? Like,
The-
the demand went away and...
Right.
That was we implemented it, and then it was like, okay, we have free switch, and then
Right.
we were like, okay, what about asterisk, dude?
There's this thing called asterisk.
This was back when free switch would regularly segfault, at least when it ran in a virtual machine.
Gotcha.
So it was like no one used free switch
because
because
you don't need timers.
it's kind of dodgy. You don't need what?
Timers.
Timers. Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why it would crash only in the end. I would
So
think
any
there'd
other
be
questions on
impact.
the internals?
So
Yeah.
this is a breakpoint.
Any, any more questions, guys?
Here's an event. You can't filter AMI.
I think that's
That's
a no.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It might be even nice. I don't know. Maybe for 6 minutes.
So my vote next would be bundler and components as gems as a session. And then what else? Maybe, one or two others if people want to break out into anything else. Because for that, it would be good for, I think, on that one, for Ben to walk through what he's kind of poked around with on bundler so far.
I
And then-
can't.
Those are different sorts of problems, though. The gem bundler stuff. Well, because you said gem bundler, but you're actually meaning gem plugins, aren't you? Or do you actually mean
Yeah, I said gem-based plugin system, and then
Yeah.
I mentioned at the bottom of the slide, bundler support makes this awesome. And bundler makes this awesome.
Because then you can have different adhesion apps.
Or just
different
okay,
bundles.
just to make it easier.
You have a gem
Yeah,
file
Right,
in your
just
Adhearsion
isolate
directory.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can talk about what I did with bundler, but I'm probably not the best person to do it, just because I kind of hacked through it, never having used it before. But you've actually used it quite a bit, haven't you?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
All of our adhesion projects are using
Oh, cool. You probably know more about it than I do then. Yeah.
There's actually probably more general interest than
it. But
some stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like that this component thing keeps on coming up, so we might as well at least talk about that.
Yeah.
generally.
Maybe we could talk about it at the same time.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
you want to lead this? Sounds like you have a lot
Sure.
to talk about.
Well, No, I probably shouldn't lead it because I'm have some like counter arguments to some of this stuff that I want to bring up.
Well, that's
No, no, that's fine.
Well, no, but I mean, I would like someone to, or at least reiterate what the goal is of the gem components and all that great sort of stuff. Just to,
Sure. So the gem components obviate the need to enable components command line. It's actually kind of goofy in the way that, that components are enabled and disabled right now. If you want to take a component from like GitHub now, you just check out the component into your components directory. If you want to disable it, it just actually moves it to the disabled folder.
right.
And instead of doing that, you could just have a gem file, just like Rails 3 plugins, where you say gem, my gem name, whatever, my component name, source components.adhearsion.com or anhub.com, whatever, and it you go to the command line, do bundle install, executes gem file, fetches it if it doesn't already have it, and loads it.
And do you foresee that replacing the current component thing or just extending it?
Probably extending it to maintain backwards compatibility.
Because one of the things that annoys me about like ongoing development as it relates to gems is that if you're in the process of developing something, having to turn it into a gem to do stuff is a total pain in the ass.
That's actually a perfect example why you might give that anything backwards
And so I do think that while you're in your development of that sort of stuff, that you are going to want it to be just sitting there.
And if you're not sharing it, you might as well just have it there. Yeah.
But then for the, for when they are, that's interesting. I as you were talking about the bundler stuff, I realized though that it probably is going to make sense to have some sort of mechanism to opt in or out of gems because inevitably people are going to install these system wide, and
but in your gem file, you just have to say.
Well, right, but are you envisioning requiring Adhearsion to use bundler because?
Yeah, that's the talk thus far.
Rails 3 requires it.
No, it doesn't. It defaults with it, but you can change one line.
There's like a dash no bundler or something whenever you generate something.
Well, actually, right now you just need to go into the config BRB and delete one line. It no longer is using it.
Bundler's important when we start talking about components, though, right?
Well,
there's no reason not to use it.
I don't know. It's
just because you want to you want to know that you've got version 1.1 of component X and 1.2 of component Y.
There's some
bundler just makes that trivial.
There's some vocal contingents of different communities who very much don't like bundler.
Why?
Why?
What are the arguments against it?
Because it sucks. It's been changing all the time.
Well, that's Yehuda, right? That's the standard Yehuda right there.
And the pound Carl Huda is mean to me. Have been
like cats. I think it's stabilized now though.
Oh yeah, no. None of those things matter when you're dealing with people that are pissed off about whatever. So I personally have been using bundler since 08, and I went through the 08 to 09 thing, and it sucked but wasn't bad. And I love bundler, but I run into a lot of people who don't like it. They're either using the isolate thing that Jay Barnett did, or
we do run that risk if we adopt bundler that it could be changing.
Right, and so requiring that sort of thing, I don't know if it's the right solution. I kind of like the Rails approach where they make sure that the auto-generated thing, if it is using bundler, makes it very simple to say we don't want to use it. But if we go that route and do the gem components, I do have some concern that you will need some way that Adhearsion doesn't force you to slurp every system installed gem that is a component into the project because you may not want all of
I would never recommend we do that. That's the nice thing about gem files, you explicitly say. Just like in Rails 3, you can say, if you have Haml installed as a gem, obviously whenever you start with Rails